see all of you, and I think you're really going to enjoy today's session. We are so fortunate to have our colleagues here today from Cabo, and each one of us come from a little bit different perspective as we, kind of aspired in our, kind of in our career development and growth. And it's interesting because three of us up here today actually came from the auxiliary side and transitioned to the Chief Business Officer role. And I think what's really such an opportunity is the partnership between the auxiliaries and obviously, especially your Cabo colleague. That relationship is so important, the collaboration, the partnership. We talk about what all of our auxiliaries do and how we support our campuses, but I think one of the most important aspects is that relationship with your Cabo colleague, because you can get so much more done together. So it is my honor to help facilitate today's panel, but I'm going to go ahead and let each of my colleagues introduce themselves, and I know many of you know them, and we're just so fortunate to have such a wide variety of expertise and knowledge that they're willing to share with us today. So Tom, do you mind starting?
Sure. Hello everyone. Tom McCarron, Vice President of Business and Financial Affairs and Chief Financial Officer for San Diego State University for the last 5.5 years. 5.5 years before that, I held a similar role at Cal State Northridge. And for 15 years before that, I was an AOA member in a few roles. So.
Good afternoon, Colin Donahue from Cal State Northridge. I'm the VP for Admin and Finance and CFO there. And Tom and I were just chatting. Tom was my boss there. I was an AVP, but we just realized that I've actually been the VP longer there now than he was. So I might be on a short tenure. But I've been at CSUN for about 22 years, and I actually, as Debbie mentioned, we all come from a little different background, and I actually came through the facilities side. And I was an AVP for facilities, and I started out as the construction manager for the campus after the Northridge earthquake. And prior to that, I spent the first decade of my career in the private sector in design and construction management particularly. So I've had a little bit of evolution over the course of my career.
Hi, I'm Lisa Chavez. I'm the Vice President and CFO at Cal State LA. And I am a proud Wildcat and a proud Toro. So I graduated from two different Cal States. And I've been on the campus now for 10.5 years, and I've been the VP for 9. And I came up through the finance ranks.
Hi, and I'm Kevin Saunders. I'm also the VP and CFO. I'm at Monterey Bay. I've been there since 1995, right before it opened. And they haven't got rid of me yet. But it's coming. See? I'm also the executive director of the University Corporation. And so I have a sort of a dual schizo role when I'm talking about auxiliaries and the CFO position. So maybe we'll get into a little of that later.
And Kevin, I think you're the only one on our panel that's also been president.
Yeah, 6 weeks.
So,
I was
Kevin,
awesome.
so we tease him that he's had, I think, all roles. But I just want to let you know we are going to try to make sure that we have plenty of time for questions at the end. So we'll probably try to wrap up the panel discussion. So there's about 20 minutes for questions at the end, because to have the opportunity to ask these folks questions and to tap into their knowledge and expertise is huge. So we want to make sure that we have that opportunity. So first of all, the first question we're going to start off with for the panel, and each one of the panelists will provide some guidance. Is Tom, and if you don't mind starting, what has been your career path that launched you to achieve your current leadership position?
So I started in industry out of college, worked 15 years private industry, mostly Fortune 500s. Through a partner in our audit firm, I moved into the CSU, into the Chancellor's Office auxiliaries initially. It fit better who I was as a human being. Instead of earnings per share next quarter, next year, I could look at what we will be for the next 5, 10, 100 years. So I never regretted that move some 26 years ago. Executive, after that, I went to, from those auxiliaries as CFO, I became Executive Director at the University Corporation at Cal State Northridge, a position that also included public-private partnerships and land development with a separate auxiliary that many are familiar with. So why did I become the Vice President? I used to talk about, we have the best jobs here in the auxiliaries. I don't have all the bureaucracy of the state. And when the president comes and says, you're going to be the interim, you don't say no. So that was my career trajectory and plan to become a VP at Northridge. So in any event, that's my story, I'm sticking to it. And could happen to you someday, it's just a warning.
So for me, coming from a construction and design industry background, when I came to Northridge, I probably never would have imagined that I'd be there, 20-some years later and be in the position that I'm in. But interestingly enough, I think for me, I worked on some of the really early auxiliary projects that we had at Tom. Remember, we actually did the first SRB project, probably 15, maybe close to 20 years ago. Yeah, he's got a good, see, he knows the exact year, 2002. And so I think I mentioned that because that actually was part of really what led me down this path, is that I started getting interested in how to put some of these projects together and why things would work, and into the business and finance side of that a little bit. And then I also had the opportunity to work for some really phenomenal people like Tom and like Mo Keomi and Jolene Kester, some of the leadership at our campus that really not only encouraged me, but allowed me to take more and more responsibility to be creative and to look at other ways to contribute. And I think through that, it just kind of moved me a little bit more towards the business side of things, and it's a lot of fun.
Okay, I thought about this, and one of the things that propelled me was a couple of really bad bosses. I had one that used to actually throw temper tantrums and throw over keys down, so that I decided that wasn't a place that I needed to go, so I found another job, and that job actually led me into my career in higher ed. So I've been in the CSU for over 23 years, and I started out at San Marcos as a temporary employee, and I have moved up, and a lot of times it was my mentors who said, oh, you can do this, and I, like Tom, was given the opportunity to be interim where I could try it out, and after, this one's not working so great, after 7 months they said, oh, you were doing a good job, you should just keep on doing it. So I kind of got strong-armed, and it wasn't ever a career path that I really chose for myself. So, but now I've been doing it for 9 years, and I think I've gotten used to doing it. So it's fun.
We're all temporary. So ever since I was a little kid, I wanted to be a CFO. So I went to college. I was a criminal justice major, and I took that major so I didn't have to do any math. So now I'm CFO. But when I got to the campus, I had worked for Marriott International for 14 years. I left Marriott, got a consulting job at Monterey Bay, and was doing some of the outsourcing for the startup campus because we really didn't have enough time to put some things together. And I fell into, so I had a number of different titles: director of business, entrepreneurial activities. I mean, any name that came up, they said, okay, why don't you take that one? And eventually I became the executive director of the foundation. We turned that into the corporation. And I was chosen by my former president to be the CFO. So there was no clear path. It's all pretty much, I think, happenstance and luck. Well, luck. Yeah. But it's really, so, you know, like I said, I don't think any of us would have imagined the roles that we took on when we first started, except Debbie. Debbie, you'll have to give a little background about you. She's been, she started when she was 8 years old. And she's been there for 40 years.
Getting close.
I know. So anyway, I don't think there is a clear path that any one of us took, but it really is just, I really do think, from my point of view, having the auxiliary background really helped me immensely to become a CFO.
I think one of the common themes you're hearing is sometimes we didn't necessarily plan to take this path or assume that this would be the path we would take. And I know one of the things that I share with my colleagues is sometimes you just have to be ready. You may not know when that time will come when someone's going to tap you on the shoulder and say, you know, will you be willing to assume interim X position? So take advantage of the opportunities and experiences that sometimes maybe are presented to you, because you never know when that moment's going to come where you're going to be asked to step up and take and assume maybe a higher leadership level. So sometimes it's not necessarily planned, but I always say, you know, just be ready. Be ready for those opportunities. So we're hearing that today. And one of the commonalities I have, I started in facilities, went to auxiliaries, and then came back. So there's all of these different experiences. You never know how it's going to help launch your future career growth. So thank you. Okay, so now we're going to go to Kevin. So Kevin, this is what you all want to hear too. So how do you interact and support your campus auxiliary organizations? So we thought we'd just get right to it.
So I actually look in the mirror and ask myself, what do I want to do?
Kevin looks in the mirror.
So having both really gives me the opportunity to look at all the financials across the campus, which is pretty amazing. And one of the things that, as a CFO, you need to do if you are looking at the auxiliary is you really need to understand that you have to protect that auxiliary. That it looks like there is plenty of money in the auxiliary, but with the debt service, with deferred maintenance, with all the different things that we have to do that the state won't support, I think a CFO needs to understand that that money truly isn't available, at least to go into a base budget situation. I think it's very dangerous if you look to the auxiliary to bail the state out. However, on the other hand, now that I'm CFO, I look at the opportunities that the auxiliary can bring to the state, and we've invested in a lot of different initiatives for the state. And I think that's exactly the balance that we have to really achieve, because the one thing that I was told early on is don't allow the auxiliary to take the place of the state. And I've never forgot, that was our first president, and he just said, don't allow that to happen. And he was the worst one for trying to get in my pocket. So, but that's true. I mean, you can't let the state off the hook because there's so many needs on the other side that the state can't provide for, that you really have to protect it. And so it's really a balance act and I think that's how I get to support the institution, both by being creative on the auxiliary side, but also protected on the CFO side.
It's really helpful to understand both perspectives and the priorities that are important for both. Would anybody else like to take on that question? Okay, all right. So Colin, next one for you. How do you demonstrate balance when needing to make difficult decisions that may have an impact on your auxiliary organizations, given the broad responsibilities that come with your position?
Well, first off, I'd reiterate what Kevin said. I mean, I think for all of us, it's critically important that we have strong auxiliaries, and I think it's a really important part of the CFO's responsibility to make sure that that message is always out there, and that the things that Kevin mentioned are understood across the academy, because a lot of times others aren't thinking about that and thinking about the impacts to an auxiliary. So the biggest thing for me is a lot of the decision making that we do can have a differential impact, as all of you know, on the auxiliary, a much greater impact. And I'd use, maybe a good example would be enrollment management. That's probably the widest ranging topic I can think of, where that's going to hit every one of our auxiliaries. At Northridge, for example, we have, we're structured differently than Kevin, so we have some of the auxiliaries that report through the VP for Student Affairs. We have an executive director for our university corporation on business services that reports directly to the president. But the CFO still has to be deeply involved with all those units. And I think to use the enrollment example, I think all of you know if you've impacted, for example, or you've seen increases or declines in enrollment, boy, that can have some incredible impacts on housing, also on the enterprise funds, parking, the bookstore, the food service. We have to deal with this every day. Most of us, over the course of the last 10 or 15 years, there's been some really significant projects that have been done across the campus. So the student unions, obviously, I know our student union has done some phenomenal things. But we got to be really careful at looking at where enrollment's going when we're projecting debt service. So I think really the way I would sum it up, Debbie, is it's really our role to look at all the other folks on the cabinet. I think if you were inside the cabinet meetings, you would see that the CFO really having to be the catalyst about thinking holistically, because a lot of the things we do on the campus, we think of as this is in my area, or this is a student affairs issue. But at the end of the day, they all have financial impacts, and I think the auxiliaries we really need to look at that, I think, every year more closely.
Thank you. Really important points. Thank you, Colin. So Lisa, what are some key initiatives or projects that you rely on your auxiliary organization to help support student success for your campus and our students?
So, over the last, let's say, 5 or 6 years, the campuses, at least on the state side, have been given a lot more flexibility. So it's a lot easier to do some of the things that we used to only do through the auxiliary. I mean, to give you an example, we, 8 or 9 years ago, we purchased a Mormon Institute that is on the hill right above the campus. And that was something that we couldn't have done without the auxiliary. Is it cutting in, or is it just me?
Okay, a little closer.
Okay, here we go. So that's a activity that was important for the campus, and we couldn't have done it without the auxiliary. And so we ended up purchasing the building, and then we rented it back out to the campus, which is, now under our new authority, we'd be able to just do this on our own on the state side, but it gives greater flexibility. Now we have a new project that we are just in the throes of completing, which is a biospace incubator. And I like to call these Frankenstein-funded projects because they involve a lot of different kinds of funding. And so when it's on the state side, it's sometimes a lot harder to do and you have more flexibility on the auxiliary side. So we have grants, and we have money from the county, we have a little bit of bond financing, so it's really all bundled together, and I really think it's a much easier project when it's participating through the auxiliary, because they are going to be a partner in the grants and the activities that occur in there. So it's startup biospace companies coming in there working with our students. And so that really goes back to what does it do for students as an auxiliary. Our auxiliary, University Auxiliary Services, does all the grants and contracts activity for the campus, and so we have a lot of instructional grants and contracts, and those allow us to employ, I think, between 500 and 600 students every year, and so those are really important for the campus and for the students, because we are a campus that has a very high percentage of Pell-eligible students. I think between 75 and 85% of our undergraduates are Pell-eligible, depending on the year. And so these opportunities for them to get be in labs and be able to use the money to help them is really critical. So I look at the auxiliary as really a partner, and it's somebody, it's a corporation, but it's also part of the campus, and so we're all driven to make the same end, which is to make students successful. And I think that's what's really important. It really is a partnership, just like all of the vendors within the auxiliary that we contract with, they're all our partners. And so it's important to understand that and acknowledge that and treat it like a true partnership, not like it is a sucking machine where I can just take money out of it, right? And so that's what's important.
Thank you, Lisa. Okay, next question. Each of our panelists will help respond. So Tom, if you would start, what challenges or opportunities have you had to navigate with your auxiliaries? And for some of us who've been in AOA for a number of years, you'll remember we were kind of reminiscing that, you know, in the very past, you know, it was mentioned that, you know, what's the greatest risk to the CSU? And it was shared that it was the auxiliaries. So we've come a long way. And that was many years ago. There's been a lot of progress and a lot of good work and good business practices and good infrastructure that's been put into place. And so we're very fortunate, I think, to have structures that we do today and the resources and policies and procedures. And we did get kind of a little bit worn out a little bit on some of the audits, so it's nice to have a little bit more time in between those. But Tom, if you can kind of share maybe what challenges or opportunities, and maybe it's more opportunity.
So the way you frame that reminds me that when I was on the auxiliary, when I was on the executive committee of AOA many years ago, there was a legislative move to unionize all of the auxiliary employees. Many of us were up in Sacramento testifying. Everyone thought it was a fait accompli. Didn't matter that it kind of conflicted with federal labor law, but this was happening in California. Ultimately, it did fail, which was wonderful, but it took a lot of people in this room and a lot who came before us that helped that happen. So that's something for everyone within AOA to keep an eye on over the years. Challenges, I love the opportunities for it, and I want to focus a little bit on, we go from the sublime to the ridiculous, but some of the simple things that we end up dealing with. And I look at Michelle Getz and I remember our MOUs with the Research Foundation, let's say KPBS, or radio and TV station, or the Campanile Foundation, and how one is being wildly overcharged, the other's, you know, just the other side of the coin. And bottom line is, I kind of joked, I need my robes and white wig to, you know, just kind of be the judge on these. The things that we work through in the day-to-day that'll fall on the CFO because of our roles there. I want to hit on something, though, before I get to the bigger one, that several of my colleagues have mentioned, and none of us, if we're worth our weight, should fill budget gaps with money from the auxiliaries, because that is the greenest, the most flexible money we have as a university. You might fill the gap once, but if you do that to your base, you've lost it forever. And the way we use the funds coming from the auxiliaries, if we're smart about it, is much different from that. I see the auxiliaries at San Diego State having a major role in a project that's coming forward, almost in the P3 format for San Diego State, and that's acquiring land to build basically a new campus, 3 trolley stops from our current campus, about 166 acres. It will include 4,600 housing units, a new multi-purpose stadium, hotels, and about 1.6 million square feet of a combination of research, university, entrepreneurial space. So I see a new auxiliary or 2 involved in that process, potentially a for-profit auxiliary. And how do we find a board for an auxiliary or 2 like that? That's a huge project, and many of our executive directors and others at San Diego State have already come to me and the president and others saying, here's how we think we can participate. So that's a big one.
Colin?
That sounded like capitalism to me.
In a nonprofit.
That's right. A nonprofit, for-profit.
No, I would just add, I mean, I think the auxiliaries clearly in the coming years are going to be, as Tom laid out, are going to become more and more instrumental as we do more of these public-private partnerships and other business ventures. There's no question about that. And same for us on our campus. Our non-state projects that we're doing, we have a couple of things in the P3 realm that are pretty unique going on, and we do them through the auxiliary for obvious reasons. You know, some of the opportunities we've had, I think we've done incredible work with our licensing, campus space licensing over the last several years, and really cleaned up what was not a good process. And it's more lucrative now, it's more focused, it does more for the academic side, it's seen as a positive, and we're generating more revenue. So, you know, that's a good example there. And I would say on the challenging side, while we've come a long way, there's still this perception on campus sometimes about auxiliaries and what they're there for, and it's almost like you know, they're twisting their mustache and in the background trying to figure out how to make revenue, and some folks don't really still understand what they're there to serve the university. That's their mission. And so I think we always have to be cognizant of that and making sure that we're taking the opportunities to let folks know the incredible contributions that the auxiliaries make for our students. At the end of the day, that's what they're there for. So I think that's really important, and we're going to continue to do that.
Lisa?
Okay, one of the challenges that we faced, we had an auxiliary that was in deficit when I started at Cal State LA, and so we had to do a turnaround plan and you know, bring this auxiliary back in the positive. So that took about 8 years to go from a negative to a positive, and then now the challenge is to keep the campus from thinking that this is a machine that they can use, right? So that's what got it into trouble in the beginning, is because they were taking too much money out of the auxiliary, and so now that we've swatted all that down, the challenge is, you know, to leave it alone. It's not your ATM to pull out. So I think that that's one of the jobs that we have, is to be prudent and to be mindful and to make sure that, you know, buy local. So don't complain about to buy food services from the campus, because we're here because you need us to be here on campus. And yes, it would be cheaper for you to go to Costco and get some muffins, but the liability for you to go across campus, the mileage and the time that you have to pay the employee to do that, it doesn't make sense. So you're always having to add what the value is back to the auxiliary. And so sometimes that gets a little frustrating. Sorry, like
We're going to put both of them over there.
you're going to give me yours? Okay.
That's a Costco microphone.
Let's see if it's the user. Oh, he's bringing me a new microphone.
Don't screw it up.
Okay, let's see if I can cut out now. So I think that's what's really important, is that we are a partnership, and so we bring value to the table on both sides, and so I think that that's just making sure that everyone understands that and doesn't take advantage of the relationship. So you know, I'm really good at saying no. My parents told me that was the first word I learned, and so I've been saying it ever since.
Thank you, Lisa. Really important points, especially about if auxiliaries are being asked to help support the campus, then the campus needs to support the auxiliaries. I know many times we're all faced with the exclusivity of dining and whether we, you said that was a good example of where we could get it cheaper, but when you really add up all those other costs, it's not. And we need to obviously reinvest in our own operations, and because those operations are what goes back to help support the campus.
You know, this isn't going to be popular with a few people in the room, but I would say the Chancellor's Office. Learning how to navigate the Chancellor's Office was a challenge. Still is for certain things. And I totally understand that side of it, but it was really hard to understand the rules, because sometimes they were just being made up and flat out said. The SRB was a good example. We used to do, we did our own bonds when we started the campus in 95. And so we had bonding authority delegated to us. And the SRB really changed that. And then learning what you needed to do and all the hoops and the other things. And, it was hard to figure out and navigate that. Now, we have come light years from there. And we have a great relationship with Robert Eaton and Finance and Treasury. I mean, he's there to support, he helps. I have some other challenges in some other departments. But it's really learning how to work with the Chancellor's Office And I'll tell you, I was one that would work around it. And now we get audited so many times that it's hard to, I mean, I got another one coming in March. I just finished one. Yeah, audits, really? And then we do our own audits, but evidently those don't count. But really, I think that was part of it. It was really learning, and for me, coming from the outside, no higher ed experience, trying to figure out where you fit with the system. You know, you're a 501c3, you're separate. Oh, you're only separate when we want you to be separate. Then you're a part of us when we want you to be a part of us. And it was really, okay, so where are we today? And I just think it's one of those things that we have all grown up, I think, in the last, at least in my case, it's almost 24 years. But I really think that's one of those things. And that is now an opportunity. How do you work with the Chancellor's office? How do you make your projects go easier? How do you really, grease the wheels or skids or whatever to make those projects a little bit easier to push forward. So I really think it's, and I don't think anyone's going to say that except me. Like I said, we're temporary. So
We all serve with the pleasure of the presidents, right? But I think Kevin raises a good point. I guess one other, maybe a little bit strategy too, is if you are working with our colleagues down in the Chancellor's office, and especially if it's project related or finance related, or anything relative to any of your financial statements or annual reports, please loop in your Cabo colleague, even if it's an FYI, because many times the Chancellor's office colleagues will reach out to us, and if we don't have a heads up that maybe depending upon where you report to, it might be different if it's student affairs versus business and finance. I would just encourage you to make sure to stay connected with your Cabo colleague if it falls within, especially the finance or facilities or that kind of realm. So we always want to be able to help too, and sometimes there's other strategies that we might be able to help share with you that might remove some of those pain points. Okay, Tom, how do you communicate and promote the support of your auxiliaries play in supporting the campus mission and strategic planning goals?
Okay, first I want to let Kevin know I just heard from Michelle Schlatt. She sent me a text. That there's a new audit starting next week.
So we recommended all of our audits go to Monterey Bay.
This is a tough question in a lot of ways. It's kind of broad, but I try to regularly communicate the many ways our auxiliaries improve student life, improve the campus. We have 3 auxiliary executive directors who are also associate vice presidents on the campus, and they're part of my senior staff, and they're integrated with the campus. It's not them and us. One of them, Michelle, sits on the president's cabinet. So like other universities, like at Northridge too, you have auxiliary representation at the highest level with the university. I think that's very important in many ways. A lot of times it's a dual role, reporting directly to the president with the dotted line to the VP, and I think that works very well. Look at our students. Many of you heard from Chris Thomas, our Associated Students President last night at San Diego State, one who really governs from the heart, and he lives exactly what he said last night. Last summer, I guess the California State Student Association had a retreat in Long Beach, and he asked me to join him for general session and talk about shared governance at San Diego State. There's no way I'm going to say no to Chris Thomas. And it was an incredible day because he felt that on so many of the other campuses, the president of the university, the VPs don't even know the name of the AS president. And the time we spend together and how well I know both Chris in one-on-ones and our Associated Students Vice President of Financial Affairs, who I also spend one-on-one time with. I think it's mentoring for me, and it works beautifully. It demonstrates the linkage and the strength of these relationships here. I make sure our new president knows that the new university house we bought before she started was purchased by one of our auxiliaries, Aztec Shops, and they fixed that up to get it ready for her living there. It shows how nimble I believe the auxiliaries are with that kind of real estate asset. So you continue to show where the value added is, and that's just a few examples.
Thank you, Tom. So Colin, what are some key strategies for auxiliary leadership to know when working with their Cabo partner and other senior administrators to ensure alignment with campus goals and priorities?
Yeah, so somewhat similar question, but the first thing I would say is every one of our campuses has a set of stated campus priorities. In our case, we have 8 strategic priorities that we've had governing us for the last 7 years or so. And so I think it's, that's a real opportunity. And in our case, the auxiliaries have really stepped up and been catalysts to drive us moving forward in some of those places where it's a little bit more difficult on the state side. And so to the comment before about that Kevin and Lisa made about you can never rely on, shouldn't rely on auxiliary revenues for the operating fund, but what the auxiliaries can do is make a huge impact on driving initiatives. Sustainability is one where some of our auxiliaries have really weighed in meaningful ways. But I think it's important to look across all of those priorities so that we're not just kind of falling back into the overarching serving student success. Those other 7, there's real ways they can do that. And in our case, one of our key strategic priorities is generating non-state revenue, right? And certainly that one falls right in. So that's one. I think the other piece is to really make sure that there's intentional and authentic integration with the leadership on the campus side, especially at the associate VP level. And again, I think we've done a pretty good job of that at Northridge, but it's something we have to be mindful about all the time. But those relationships are critically important so that not only do you know the campus priorities, but also the leadership of the campus at that level that's really doing the business day-to-day of the organization understands what the auxiliaries can do and also the impacts on it. So I think that's key. And then finally, I think just looking for opportunities to make sure that the auxiliaries are part of important initiatives on campus, important committees. And I'm sure many of you are involved in key searches for high-level positions. The auxiliaries are critical in those. So, I think we all need to look for those opportunities to make sure that we're somewhat blurring the lines. I think when people are confused and they don't know that somebody works for an auxiliary, that a lot of times that's probably a good thing.
Thank you, Colin. So Tom, if you could share with us, what do you see the role of auxiliaries growing, diminishing, or staying status quo in the future? As many of you may know, that Tom served on a task force a few years ago with other campus presidents and auxiliary leaders, and really looking at the role and purpose of auxiliaries and the future of auxiliaries, and his role was critical in that, and his experience and being able to really, I think, help everyone on that task force understand the importance of auxiliaries and their values. So it's a perfect question for me.
No, thank you. And going back to that time, I think after we spent probably a year together and a few of us from the auxiliaries serving on that, what you realize is many presidents wouldn't know the details of what was being done within the auxiliaries, and we respectfully let them know as we went through the process how that was working on the campuses. And bottom line was, yes, the roles are changing, but the value has not. Yes, the auxiliaries, if you think about what a bookstore was 20 years ago and what a bookstore is today, can anyone in here tell me what a bookstore will look like 20 years from now? It's going to continue to change drastically. And what will fill that gap for those auxiliaries that handle commercial services and are involved with the bookstore operations? I think we have people coming in here, I'm not sure. Many campuses, and we've talked about this several times, are pursuing P3s, public-private partnerships. Sometimes they're public-public partnerships. What role can the auxiliaries play? Many times it's underutilized university land to be developed. Other times it's functions that we don't have the bandwidth, the debt capacity to grow. We were at P3 conference in San Diego last fall, and I kind of half jokingly said, at San Diego State, we have a $3 billion plus project, and I've spoken to Robert Eaton and Barclays and everyone said, we don't quite have the debt capacity to do it ourselves, so we might need some partners. Having said that, you know, Todd Summers come to me about, with the new stadium, the commercial services, the concessions, etc., and how might they compete and get involved in the operation of that. And I think that's a great way to start looking at these with the university. We have Christina Brown has been involved with AS, and we have an expansion of the rec center that included fields with that. How might those fields be developed on the new campus as we expand here? And we're starting to look at that. We're going to do this with about probably 10 to 20 external partners, but I think all of our internal partners I'd love to work with first as much as we can. That's the way to grow a campus. I think we're limited only by our imaginations, quite frankly. And if any of you bring a project, well thought out project or approach to one of these issues to the vice presidents and the president, I assure you they'll have a listening ear there.
So Tom, safe to say that you see auxiliaries growing, not diminishing or staying status quo?
I see them very much growing.
Okay, last question for the panel, and then we're going to open it up to all of you, so be thinking about your questions. So Kevin, if you don't mind starting on this one, what would be the one critical piece of advice you would provide our auxiliary leaders here today?
I think Tom just said it. You know, we're only limited by our imaginations, and I think there was so many opportunities that we don't even understand yet that will become apparent as this. You know, it's the whole disruption of the world right now. But truly, in education and in auxiliaries, I don't know that we have a good idea yet about where we're going. But I know there's going to be an amazing opportunity. And I guess the piece of advice I would have is don't take no for an answer until you know it's a real no. Sometimes people the administration gets busy, right? My people can bring me some good ideas, and I might not have, the time for it. Don't do that. Don't let them get away with that. Push, make it work, because you really do know and have the best seat in the house as to really determine what needs to be done on your campus, and it's a different perspective than the administration has. And so I would just say, just don't take no for an answer. If you have a good idea and you know it's something that you want to pursue, just keep pursuing it. Whether it happens now or in the future, I just don't let it go. Because if it really means something to you in the campus and changing students' lives, then just make it happen. And I think that's the one thing I would just say, just be persistent.
Thank you. Lisa?
So one thing I would say is being flexible is probably one of the most important things, because our needs change and things change and leadership changes and the direction can go, you're going right and then all of a sudden you're told to go left. And if you're an inflexible person, that can drive you nuts. If you have at least learn to kind of go, you'll be okay. So I would say being able to be flexible is really the most important thing, I think. Especially given you're asked sometimes to do something with very little time to react.
Colin? Thank you, Lisa.
Yeah, so probably all of you have heard from time to time on your campus the term, we need to play in the sandbox together better, and it's really about collaboration. I think we need to be way past that. I'd use a different analogy, maybe if you use a sports analogy, we need to do more than letting the other partner into the locker room. You got to have a game plan and say, let's work on this together. We need to combined brain power on this. And so I really feel like we have to get past collaboration, which frankly is often on somebody else's priority, into really having true integration. Some of these things that we're talking about, the way things are going, as Tom mentioned, on the public-private projects, the way things are just going in our business-to-business deals. We're going to have a session later talking about some of the things we're doing there. The nature of the way we're doing business is really tipping to where the collaboration and the integration with the auxiliary side is absolutely crucial. You know, there's no question about that. We do not have the skill set, certainly on the state side. We need to build that. There's more on the auxiliary side, but all of us need to work together to become much more savvy in those areas. So that's what I would say.
Thank you, Colin. Tom?
Continue to demonstrate your value and willingness to help advance the university, even in areas that are not necessarily your area of responsibility. Easier said than done. Don't always stay in your lane, but when you don't, do it respectfully, do it carefully. Many of us do the same thing with the Chancellor's office on a pretty regular basis. And it's the only way sometimes to move things forward. But some of the best ideas are going to come from those who are not responsible for a particular area. I want to go back to where we started too and recognize that your career could move you to a stateside position someday, and don't think of it as we've always said, the dark side. She's gone back and forth, and there's a bright side on both sides, I think, for Debbie.
I think what I would probably add, in addition to my colleagues, is if you are having transitions on your campus, leadership transitions, new president, new vice president, new provost, whatever it might be, new VP for student affairs, be proactive, reach out, rather than just kind of maybe standing back and saying, well, I'm going to wait till they ask me a question about auxiliaries, or I'm going to wait till they set up a meeting with me. Be proactive. I think the messaging and understanding of how auxiliaries are such an integral part of our campus, and how auxiliaries are helping to support student success. All of you have much more direct and closer touch points to our students. You guys, we're all in the trenches with them, and your perspective and what you know what the needs of our students are and how we can help implement initiatives that'll help them and support them it needs to be. So embrace that, but don't, when there is a transition, really, I would encourage you to reach out and be sure that they know who you are and what role you play and how you're helping to partner with the campus in moving forward some really important initiatives, especially if they're part of your campus strategic plan. So really always make those linkages, and it's just, you know, the relationship is so important. Okay, so we have about 20 minutes for questions. And please, I think all of us are willing to take any questions you might have, and Taryn is there to help facilitate. You can either stand up where you are and ask the question, or we can bring a microphone to you. But take advantage of this great opportunity. Thank you, Rick. And be sure to introduce yourself and your position in campus so we know where you're from. Northridge.
Good afternoon, Rick Evans, Executive Director of University Corporation, Northridge. Good afternoon, Debbie, Tom, Colin, Lisa, and the rest of the panel.
You can tell we've all worked together a long time.
You all clearly have a great vision of auxiliaries and where we've come from, where we're going, where we need to go. This conversation for the last hour, do you have that with your fellow Cabo members as a group? Do the rest of the Cabo campuses, or your counterparts on Cabo, have the same sort of vision? Do you have these conversations? I'm just interested from a system-wide perspective.
No.
And no.
Next question. And you know, Tom's been on Cabo longer than I have, and Lisa and I have been on about the same amount of time. When I first got on Cabo, I was amazed that no one talked to each other. Pretty astounding, because I came from this secret society that Richard couldn't join, and we had 10 to 12 executive directors meet 3 times a year, and all we did was talk about the challenges, the opportunities, the things we were doing. And I was amazed that the CFOs of the system weren't even talking like that. No conversation. Everything was done, I would say, in a back room, basically. They wouldn't share what they were doing. They would go and talk to the right person in the chancellor's office to talk about whatever they needed to talk about, but they didn't do it publicly, which was, just kind of crazy, and it was really difficult when I first got on there to get myself up to speed as a new CFO. So it is so much better now. We are doing a much better job, but we still have a lot of room to improve, and we were just talking about it yesterday that we need to get together and just talk. We have an agenda, we go through it, we jump on a plane, and you know what? We need to be better than that. We really need to engage with each other to help each other and to help the system. So it's a great crush, whatever your name is.
So let me add to that a little bit too, Rick. After 11 years, I'm the longest serving member of Cabo. So it's changed a lot in 11 years. And I think it's helped a lot having 3 of us that currently on Cabo that came through the auxiliary ranks. I still remember at the beginning, one of the VPs who came up to me almost in this threatening way and said, "You tell me one thing that auxiliaries do that we can't do on the state side." And before I could answer him, one of the fellow VPs, in fact, Mike Neal from Bakersfield at the time, said, "Well, I came in and I said the exact same thing. But then I studied it for a while and I paid attention and I realized why we have the auxiliaries doing some of these functions, even though we could do them on the state side." And I give that story because I've seen it over the last 11 years change dramatically on the understanding, especially from those who come from other states. They don't understand the 501c3 model. We're fairly unique. SUNY and CUNY in New York have similar models, but most of the country don't. So it's come a long way.
Hi, Michelle Getz from SDSU Research Foundation, and my boss told me we had to ask questions, so I'm asking a question.
Good employee.
Yeah, I'm very compliant. But just to add on to what you're saying, we've gone through so many rounds of education. The task force that you sat on, for example, a year-long task force really looking at the value of auxiliaries. And as we look forward at the enormous change in leadership that is occurring now across campuses at the presidential level, the vice presidential level, the auxiliary leadership level, what do you see as the key sound bites that we can use to, when you get that little bit of attention, because presidents and vice presidents have so many demands on our time, a year-long task force again, or a full-day presentation on auxiliaries is maybe not going to be the best way to educate. Are there key things you would say to the auxiliaries represented here that if you had the chance, give these messages, take these opportunities to show the auxiliary value? What would those things be?
So my answer to you, Michelle, is exactly what you and Todd and Christina did as we had a new president come in. We asked everyone to give an executive summary of the functions, keep it simple, a couple of pages, links if they want to, if she wants to drill down in any area to get more detail, to really help a new president. The same thing for vice presidents on your campus when they come in to get an understanding without having to learn from everyone around them and their impressions of what the auxiliaries do, which are often not very well thought out. So what you all just did in this last year, continue to refine it, and with all the changes that we know are going to happen in the future, redouble the efforts on this to make sure they know what the value is.
I would add to that too, that I think it's really important. The informational part is one thing, but it's the real initiatives where you're coming in and talking to a president as a team about what we're trying to put together, and it's very clear how critical the auxiliary is to that, to achieving that. I think we just need to be more mindful of that, because in the past we've been able to do our work together, but a little bit in the background, and sometimes it doesn't highlight just how crucial they are. Is they're more than just a tool to achieve this. In some cases, we can't do it without the auxiliary. There's not another way to pull that off, and I think that needs to be more apparent. Like Tom said, there's people that come from other parts of the country, and we see more and more turnover, and it's not readily apparent. I can tell you from in the last couple of years, some of the newer CFOs that have come into the position have been smart enough to look around and see where the real successes are happening, and have reached out to some of us and said, hey, you guys really seem to work very functional, and we need to build this up. Can we talk to you about that? So that's encouraging, and again, it goes back to within Cabo, we always need to pay attention to making sure we're communicating, offline individually, but also a little bit more effectively as a group to talk about these topics rather than just kind of go through our business.
And I would add that it's much like when you get a new boss, you personally get a new boss, right? You're kind of under some scrutiny, and then there may be somebody who's trying to throw you under the bus or go squirrel, so that they'll go focus on you instead of focus on something else rather than you. So I think it's, what is your value that you add, and being able to have that elevator speech, and then also be proactive, like everyone has previously mentioned. Go out there and meet with the new person, so that you're the first one in there, and don't complain, whatever, don't throw somebody else under the bus, but make sure that they understand what your functions are. So I think that's one of the critical things, and as we have had this turnover in leadership, it is critical that that what your value is, where you're adding, and that you have that speech, and then also that you've aligned yourself with others in the administration so that they're supporting you as well.
There comes the microphone. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Cindy Derrico. I'm at Cal State Channel Islands and Associate Vice President for Student Affairs. I work with our associated students and our student union as an auxiliary, and also with housing as an auxiliary enterprise. So I'm curious, all of you talked in one way or another about the importance of preserving, protecting the auxiliary, but also there were times when you needed to make some hard decisions or pursue some difficult courses of action. I'd be interested in some examples that you might be willing to share about ways that you had to take a hard step to protect an auxiliary, either when you were leading the auxiliary or maybe you were the recipient, someone else was trying to do that, and what you learned from that process. Is there something you can share with us that will help us understand that a little bit better?
So I can give you a very real one. Deborah, can I share the discussion we were having the other day? Deborah Hammond, who's Deborah Hammond and I, she runs our University Student Union at Cal State Northridge and has for a long time. We've had a long history together. And boy, we've dealt with some difficult things, and one of them we were talking about the other day probably goes back again, my memory fades, but at least 15 or more years, probably closer to 20. We had a situation where we had a really difficult project, and I won't go into all the details of it. It was a renovation project. There were some serious issues and we decided at a certain point that it probably wasn't the best thing to go forward with the project in its current form, but we needed to do the project, and we ended up, we had completed a set of drawings, and I remember we were just laughing about this the other day, we probably weren't laughing initially. I remember sitting with Deborah and talking about the fact that we need to change our architect, take a $400,000 set of plans for renovation and basically throw them away, and come up with a new concept to do a new, smaller, more efficient building that would serve our needs. And that one has always been a great example for me, because that was an incredible leap of faith on Deborah's part and our VP for Student Affairs at the time, to be able to make that kind of decision. But we could only do something like that because there was so much trust and there was such a deep working relationship. And we really thought it through. It was the right thing to do. And again, there's a lot more details to that, so that wasn't just a quick decision. But I think those kind of examples for me, we did the right thing for the university. It was a smart thing to do in the long run. But there's probably 20 more I could come up with.
So the most difficult thing that we've had to do was the auxiliary that was in the hole, and we had to cut expenses, and we had to severely cut expenses. And so we had to lay off, in the first round, 22 employees, and in the second round it was 14. And that is a very, very difficult thing to do because of, people's livelihoods, and then trying to figure out how do you right the ship and make decisions. I mean, it got so bad. I was, at that point, the interim executive director because we couldn't afford an executive director at that point. And so I had to make decisions on what vendors we were going to pay. And we had $35,000 in cash left at the bottom of the problem. So we had to pay the bread man so we could have bread. I mean, that was a really tough, it was a really tough. The controller and I, we were every day looking at how much cash was in and what we could pay. So very tough decisions, and thankfully they are no longer in the hole.
Great success story. Kevin, did you want to add anything?
Hi, Leslie Roan, Tower Foundation, San Jose State University. Since you all have the benefit of having been on the inside at Cabo, as well as being very familiar with or being on the inside of auxiliaries, to flip this around a little bit, what do you think that the feedback that you hear from your Cabo colleagues about auxiliaries that are perhaps ways that we can improve? What do you think those are that are valid?
I don't know that we really have that much of a conversation, quite frankly, about auxiliaries. I think, thankfully, I think our auxiliaries are in super shape. And if it's not coming up as an issue, I think that tells us a lot about the state of our auxiliaries and how good they are. We also have a lot of new VPs. And I don't think we do a real good job of educating them as to what the auxiliaries role really is. And I think that's something that we need to improve upon, because it will take them a while to get up to speed and really understand. And because we really don't have those conversations, I think we're neglecting something that's truly important, and making sure that we are working with our colleagues to make sure they understand the importance of the auxiliaries. And I don't think we do a good job of that. I don't think we do a good job of that with the provost, the new provost. I mean, we've got a ton of new provosts. We have a lot of new presidents. And I think it's really up to, and it could be up to Cabo to try to fix that. Because, when the auxiliaries were broken, and I remember that night, and it was like, holy crap, really? And then all of a sudden, it was proclaimed that they were fixed, and it was like, well, what did we do different? But I just don't think we really, as a system, had a real good understanding of the role of the auxiliary and why they were important, and it took that, I think, to wake us all up. And we've gone through some interesting times, but I really believe, because we don't get a lot of questions about the auxiliaries, that it really does show what a great job you're all doing. So I applaud you for that. I mean, if that was an issue, that would be really bad. And so it's not an issue, so you're really doing a great job.
So give yourselves a hand. I do agree with Kevin's point, though, that I think the onboarding with new Cabo colleagues is done a little bit more ad hoc, and we can be a little bit maybe more purposeful there, and we'll welcome any input from AOA and all of you. So, David, thank you.
Hi, I'm Dave Prenovo. I'm a new employee of the auxiliary system, and I just wanted to ask you, the vetting system with forming an auxiliary, we've lived through the special purpose entities of the faculty housing auxiliaries, and we've lived through the philanthropic auxiliaries. Some of them survived, some of them didn't. Can you talk a little bit about the review process when a campus wants to form an auxiliary, goes down to the chancellor's office, it's reviewed? Is Cabo any aware, I realize you should be involved on your campus, intimately aware of it, but it'd be kind of nice to hear that.
I'm smiling because just recently had a conversation with Carrie and with our campus council because we're looking at splitting our foundation because we don't have a separate philanthropic. We do post-award and philanthropic all in one foundation. So we're looking at creating a new auxiliary. So Carrie, I don't know, do you mind maybe just sharing a little bit about what we talked about, or how would you, I'd want to be respectful of.
Sure. No, the decision as to obviously whether to create a new auxiliary, that's not, the chancellor's office isn't involved in that. That's completely up to the campus. But once the campus decides that it wants to create a new auxiliary, the process is, there are a number of kind of administrative procedures that you have to file forms with the Secretary of State, you need to have your articles of incorporation, you need to incorporate, you need to have draft bylaws. Those materials are packaged up and they're sent to the Chancellor's office along with a letter to the Chancellor requesting this new auxiliary and explaining why it's necessary. And that's where they're going to look to, particularly the Cabo reps, to talk about financially, does this make sense? How does this fit and make sense in the bigger picture?
And I think that's an important point. And for Fresno, we have 6 auxiliaries. I think we're one of the ones that have one of the higher number. And so we would have 7. But I think the key point is that you're very, diligent about indicating why this would not create additional overhead or inefficiencies. So we have a central service auxiliary that provides management services to our other sister auxiliaries. I know many of you are set up the same way. But I think from a Cabo perspective, that would be, as Kevin and I are wearing both hats, that we would look at to make sure that we're not creating additional overhead or inefficiencies or additional expense by creating that additional auxiliary and making sure that there's non-existing auxiliary that can handle that function. And when you kind of answered those questions, then, embarking upon the process that Carrie indicated, but again, making sure that you're staying in touch with your Cabo colleague on your campus. Tom, is there?
And David, your question was broad, but those of us who've been around a few years know through the 90s and 2000s, most campuses went to philanthropic auxiliary, and a lot of the reason behind it, from what I can see, is that it took a different skill set for those who were on that board. There's a lot of, hopefully, CEOs and others who not only would give, but could affect giving at a much different level there, too. On the housing, as we get into these, I would say, so let me talk about what we might do, as I mentioned, in San Diego here. If we're doing a massive development of a new campus, which could have up to 4,600 housing units, we're talking a separate auxiliary for a myriad of reasons, but even the governance of that would be very different. More than likely have folks from the Chancellor's office, as they do with the system-wide philanthropic auxiliary. It could be very, very different from what we're looking at now. And the fact that part of this is revenue generation for the university and the system ultimately, now we're looking at the potential need for a for-profit auxiliary to protect the tax-exempt status of the nonprofit. So lots of reasons. And the last thing I'll mention on this is I still remember the talk of the number of auxiliaries we had even 15, 20 years ago, saying we have way too many at 65 or 70, and now we're at about 90, and we don't have that discussion because each one has a purpose, or as you said, some of them have gone away over the years.
So I just want to, so we had a housing auxiliary. We were the first campus in the CSU to have staff faculty housing. We had to get special legislation to do that. And we set up an auxiliary for that housing project. And after a while, because we didn't know what we didn't know, and we really weren't sure what kind of issues we would run into. And I think after about maybe 8 or 10 years, we folded it. I didn't fold it the right way, by the way, Carrie. What a shock, right?
Surprise.
But I folded it. But to Debbie's point, you know, we shouldn't do these just to do them. We really have to have a rationale in mind. And if you don't need them, you know, just don't continue. I mean, really think through what you're trying to achieve with these auxiliaries. And in my case, that was a perfect thing to just unwind, and we put it right in the corporation. It just didn't make sense. So that's as important as creating one too.
Thank you, Kevin. Lisa?
And I will add that we did fold one correctly, and it's a pain in the butt. So if you're going to have to fold one, it's a lot of work. Yeah.
Well, I just want to thank all of you for joining us this afternoon, and can we give a round of applause to our panelists?